Hey everyone, welcome to Alumless. I am Ryan Catherwood. It is Friday, 11:30, July 21st. Great to have you with us. Chris Marshall, how you doing today, sir?
Doing great. Living the dream, Ryan. You know the drill.
Living the dream. Well, glad to be back with you with another edition of Alumless. Alumless is a CMAC production. On the show, we talk about alumni and donor engagement strategies in higher ed and sometimes other things, but mostly that. We are live today, streaming on LinkedIn as well as on YouTube. So if we are not connected on my profile, the CMAC business profile, we haven't, I guess LinkedIn has not provided us the juice to be able to publish live on the CMAC business page, but hopefully we'll get some more publishing there and we'll publish on the business page as well eventually. We are back from Case Summit. We have a great guest today, and Temi Akin-Aina from Western University in Canada, who we both had a chance to chat with while we were there. But Chris, so yeah, this was my first summit, Case Summit in New York this year, and we got a chance to catch up, of course, a couple times. But looking back on it, what were some of the highlights that you had from the conference? Some of the takeaways?
Mainly for me, it was the great meals with you, Ryan, and clients.
Yes.
We had a couple good.
CMAC splurged for some very delicious lunch and dinner. Nobu for dinner. That was a treat.
Nobu for dinner was a treat and a half.
Invited myself.
Yeah, that was great. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. Back to Temi real quick. We're going to bring her out in just a minute, but we bumped in, had a nice chat at Case Summit. But she reminded me that she and I met when she was at McGill University a couple years ago, or many years ago, and I was there doing some interviewing, and I remember speaking with her and leaving that meeting thinking that, wow, there's a future star, and here she is. The star has risen, and I can't wait to bring her out. But for Case Summit, AI, and AI were the three buzzwords that kept coming up, and ChatGPT kept coming up as well. That was the main theme throughout the conference. The most compelling one for me was the Dan Pink's talk at the beginning. You actually were missed it because you had a travel day from hell coming in the first day, and you missed the opening. There's two keynotes that were back to back. Chad Littlefield, and then it was great. And then Dan Pink gave a talk about sort of the new way of approaching work. And one of my favorite takeaways from that talk was, instead of making a to-do list, which I do, and I have it sitting here on my desk and I cross off as I go, right? He said, make a to-don't list. And he explained what that was about. And he said, like, for him, it was, don't check email in the morning. Do your work in the morning. That's when you're most productive. And it has made a whole difference for him. So I've started to do it. I'm a little better. I still cheat a little.
What's a to-don't for today?
A to-don't would be, don't check my email in the morning. Don't bother Ryan after 4 p.m. Here's my to-do list right now.
So you have a side-by-side to-do list and a to-don't list? Is that what
that was really helpful? So I'm working on that, trying to get better at that. And then the other thing that I found, that one of the questions I think Chad asked, if you could go back in time at your first Case Summit, I've been to 7 or 8 of them. What advice would you give yourself? And my advice to myself back then would have been, don't go to sessions, just network with people and meet people one-on-one. It's better outcomes for all reasons. But there were some really good sessions. I shouldn't say that and make it too public, but the networking time is the most important for me at a conference like that. So I really enjoyed it.
Well, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that as a consultant, small business owner, you're there to make connections. Yeah, the sessions are great, but and I remember Tracy Plale on the Monday from Pickle Jar Communications, who I remember our guest, Chris Kendrick from LSE, mentioned her work on content strategy. And I thought she did a nice presentation on mindfulness and advancement, and got some useful takeaways from that presentation as well. But you're right. I mean, a lot of the conference was spent talking to people, and just
you said you had 15 conversations when you were there of substance.
Yeah, I would say, like, I wrote up some contact reports for myself. And, I think I would say there were 15 conversations between Monday morning at 7 and Tuesday when I had to fly out at 11. And including, you're going to some sessions in that time, right? And but you're trying to have as many substantive conversations as you can, but you're also trying to just introduce yourself to some other folks, right? And just say hi.
Yep, exactly right. And from a work business development pipeline productivity standpoint, highly successful 2 days for me, and I'm sure for you as well. So it's good.
I think so. We'll follow up on that particular thread, but let's bring out Temi to join us. We talk about the CASE conference. We're going to talk about alumni engagement in Canada. And actually, I was remembering our friend Nancy Merritt saying how she crashed the Canadian breakfast the conference that folks had broken off, and she had gotten the wrong
She was supposed to go to
direction.
the CAAE meeting, and she went to the CCAA meeting. I think she got.
Yeah. Oh, we were laughing just because she was like, everybody was just so nice and welcoming, and even though they knew I was in the wrong room, like
She was
they were
from Pitt.
still like,
Pitt
yeah,
is not in
Nancy Merritt
Canada.
was
The last time I checked. So
yeah. So different vibe there. All right, well, let's bring out Temi. Hello, how are you?
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Just checking.
Yep.
Yeah,
Got it.
Perfect.
coming in loud and clear. It's great to
Excellent.
have you, Temi Akin-Aina. You're from Western University in London, Ontario, and we've known each other since you were at Concordia University in Montreal, and before that, you had met Chris at McGill, right? Do we have that bio right? Yeah. So you've
That is
definitely,
correct.
and you made this huge jump from Montreal to Ontario and taken on this big leadership role, which I'm sure is incredibly exciting. We're going to dive into it. But I thought maybe you could share a little bit about your takeaways from the CASE conference and some of the things that popped into your mind throughout.
For sure. Thank you. And good to see you again, Chris and Ryan, even though it's just a couple of days ago.
Yep.
So a couple of pieces from the CASE Summit, and to your point, you just mentioned the CCAE breakfast. So CCAE is the Canadian Council for Advancement of Education, so kind of the Canadian CASE corollary. And what was really nice about being at Summit was CCAE hosted us for breakfast and for dinner. So really looking at the summit as this opportunity for advancement professionals from around the world to get together, to reconnect, and to have some shop discussions about the work we're doing, different alumni engagement strategies, and what our institutions are doing and thinking at this moment in time. So that was really fantastic to be able to do. And the other piece that was really interesting for me as well were really some of the leadership conversations at Summit, just about kind of managing your team, and meeting up with other advancement leaders. So I agree, Chris, that there's really something about being able to reconnect with advancement professionals. I did not take the strategy of just booking meetings, though I will say that I kept feeling as though I should have had more substantive meetings and conversations with people. So, it's only my first one. Maybe next time I'll do the meeting strategy as well as noting which programs I wanted to go to. And I also quite enjoyed the Dan Pink session. And I'm sure we'll talk about it this morning as well. But certainly AI was on everybody's minds. And I know a lot of us have been talking about ChatGPT, but really what the opportunities that AI presents for us being more effective in our work and moving us away from maybe some of the busy work towards, more intentional and substantive engagement is really exciting for the entire industry.
Yeah. And for those listening live, thank you for tuning in. If you want to introduce yourselves in the comments on LinkedIn, we'd love to know you're joining us. Any questions for Temi, Chris, or myself, please throw them in the comment section, the LinkedIn event, and we can see them here in our StreamYard interface. But, I thought one thing that was interesting about the conference as well was there was kind of a bit of a darker undertone to it. I don't know if you all kind of picked that up, but I must have heard, that we all need to worry about the fact that, perceptions of higher ed are kind of at an all-time low, and the enrollment cliff is coming. And, there was definitely a little gloom on top of what I thought was some bright spots around technology and, some strategies in that area. I'm talking about AI. So when you were at the summit, you had the chance to work and get to converse with other leaders in Canada. Temi, what were the conversations like? What are folks thinking about? Sometimes we focus a little bit, perhaps too much, on the U.S. market here, but it's not too dissimilar in Canada, right? What was your perceptions?
So I think, so to your point, I do agree there were some kind of gloomier conversations around, what we should be concerned about as an industry. Some of the really good conversations I had were, a lot of Canadian institutions are really thinking about our global engagement, our engagement strategies for alumni around the world as well, and what that looks like in terms of the mix of engagement opportunities that we share with alumni. there were also some really interesting conversations around kind of virtual engagement to in-person engagement, and that's of interest to me personally. If there's anyone who knows me knows that I love using virtual engagement as an on-ramp for getting alumni into our programming, and then thinking tactically about what we do once we kind of get them excited to be participating with us. And then the other conversations are some that I would say are themes within the industry, but certainly I love to discuss kind of alumni engagement metrics. What are we measuring, and how, and what does that say about not just the effectiveness, but the next steps for our different institutions? So those are some of the conversations I've been having for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for Burns and Christina and Sheena for joining us and chiming in. You've got your fan base, Temi, that's checking out the show today, which is fantastic. So Chris, you've had a chance to work with Canadian institutions. You're an observer of the space in general. What sort of thoughts do you have about alumni and donor engagement programs in Canada? Some of the differences, some of the similarities, just sort of high level thoughts on that.
Yeah, I've worked with many, but in depth with University of Toronto, University of British Columbia, and McGill. So you do a deep dive when you have a chance to do that, and you really get to see and understand and learn the culture a bit. And for one, it's just a kindler and gentler group of people that you work with in Canada. But generally speaking, I mean, the United States in general is ahead in a lot of ways in the fundraising and alumni engagement spaces. But there's certain institutions, and three of them I mentioned, McGill, UBC, and I'm sure Western with your leadership will be there, if not already there. In Toronto, I think I didn't mention them, but in terms of advanced evolutionary stage of an alumni program or a fundraising program, generally speaking, the United States is ahead of most of the rest of the world. But Canada has been a place where I've seen examples of pretty sophisticated programs and models that are close to where we are in the U.S. I don't mean to say that in a bragging way. I'm saying it in a, who has spent the most time thinking and doing these things. Most other places in the world didn't have to worry about fundraising for their higher education system. United States system is unique in that it's, funded in many ways by the people who purchased it previously through their donations. And often it's, state or government driven around the rest of the world, and, federal government driven. So Canada has seen some models that I think are close to some of the U.S. that I've seen. Another big distinction, and more recently than anything else, is the data protection. Just like GDPR in the UK, Canada's got what do we call it, CPPA or something like that. I think that's it. I wrote it down. But it's your Data Protection Act, which is real, and we have a few of that in the States, but it's real in Canada. And then the last thing I'll say is this. I remember, I won't say which school it was, but we were talking about the Net Promoter Score of, which is, would you recommend blank to a friend or colleague? And in many cases in Canada, they have some schools that have done an NPS. Would you recommend blank university to another student? And this particular institution had very low scores. In fact, they were negative, which you can get negative 100, positive 100 is the score on an NPS scale. And when they got the results back, the response to the result was this: well, we have spent the last 100 years or whatever number of decades as an institution not treating our students very well, let alone even thinking about our alumni. So I'm not surprised to see the results being that low. It was one of those places where for literally decades, it was, first meeting of students, look to your left, look to your right, one of you won't be here next year. And they were proud of that. That was like a weeding out thing, not a student experience thing. It was a very different model. And so that has resulted in an alumni base that is not all that engaged or, connected. And it's an opportunity, obviously, for going forward. They've changed that, and they'll have different results in the future. But those are my not that quick, but observations on Canadian alumni engagement.
Yeah, well, you stayed roughly within your allotted minutes
I
of
know.
time there. I thought that was perfectly a reasonable response. So, Temi, you've been in your role for about a year now, maybe perhaps just shy, coming over from Concordia University. You've been flying around the world, meeting alumni, attending conferences, gathering with other leaders from Canada. What are you thinking about in terms of what alumni want and how they hope to engage with the university?
Well, so there's a couple of pieces. So When I was thinking about coming to Western, one of the big things for me was just Western alumni affinity is really second to none, and I'm proud to be able to say that because it is a really unique thing and it's a really fantastic thing for an alumni leader to have. Just having, thousands of alumni that are kind of pushing you forward to be able to push the institution forward and to support the institution. So at Western, we have over 355,000 alumni in 160 countries around the world. So it's just this fantastic alumni base, and about half of those are contactable, virtually, digitally, and then obviously we get higher percentage proportions as we move forward. So in terms of alumni expectations of engagement with the institution, I would say that they're quite high. Our Western alumni want to engage virtually, whether it's through lifelong learning. We also have fantastic athletic programs, a football program. And then we also have, a brilliant network of volunteers around the world from the Western Alumni Association that's, kind of headquartered in London. We are starting to have more alumni directors from around the world. But so we have a model and a history of both alumni engagement as well as of volunteers interested in what the institution is doing, interested in how the institution is moving forward, and interested in different ways to engage with us. So, I mentioned earlier virtual. I think virtual is this great pathway to get people, into engaging with our programs. But the other piece that has been, I wouldn't say that it's unique, but it's also part of the fun of being in alumni work and talking to different alumni, was our Asian alumni have been really interested in the rankings. So, traveling to Singapore and Hong Kong, and that's also been a targeted focus of the institution and of our president, Alan Shepard, in making sure that Western is competing smartly in the areas that we're strong in, and growing our presence worldwide and moving up those rankings. And so, we had a number of conversations with alumni who said that that was really important for them, because the experience they had at Western was so pivotal to their lives. And being in a culture where the rankings were important, they basically wanted our position in the rankings to match what their prospective students wanted to have as part of that conversation, and putting Western in the mix globally for them.
Yeah. How big is your team, Temi, real quick?
We've got 18 people in alumni engagement.
Wow.
It's a pretty sizable team. And so you've arrived, you've done a bit of an assessment on what's going on, what opportunities are, where you'd like to sort of make a mark moving into the future. We'll talk more a bit in depth on those things in the bonus section, but talk about how you've been thinking about updating some traditions on campus. We talked about one particularly, but I know you've sort of had your eye on and have kind of empowered team members to really say, hey, let's keep the scaffolding of these initiatives or the core point of it, but I'm open to updating it, right?
Yeah. Well, so, and I think that that's one of the nice opportunities as a new leader at an institution. I know the importance of tradition in alumni engagement, and we know that those are, that at every institution there are traditions and anchors that, really are very meaningful for alumni. But I think some of the opportunities also of the pandemic have been around innovation, right? What are the pathways for not just our alumni who've always felt that anchor to the institution? What are the pathways for other, groups, and whether that's tied to, accessibility of our events, our programs, or that's tied to, a diversity of different speakers? What are those opportunities to get more people into the mix? And one of the traditions that is important for an alumni team is convocation. So, we've always done traditional convocation receptions. And as part of looking at some of our work, we spoke with the team, and and they came back with a proposal to do away with kind of the traditional convocation receptions and actually switch to a model which utilized QR codes and photo booth stations on campus. And so this was, as part of our convocation programming. Now, obviously, we also wrapped around this with, having, a new digital publication for the recent grads to let them know about, the alumni community they're joining, as well as the benefits and services that they'll be able to take part in. But the piece that was so, it felt transgressive in thinking about what we're not going to have receptions anymore. We're just going to have these photo booths. But when you think about the next generation, they're digitally proficient. they wanted to get to have that moment, and then also memorialize that moment with these the photos that were taken by professional photographers, and they were able to download those right away. And so my joke was that, for example, Ryan, like, your kid isn't yelling at you to take like a fifth photo because she didn't like, your skill with the taking of the photos at convocation.
Sounds like my wife, and she stopped asking me at this point. Yeah.
Well, see, there you go. So if there's a professional photographer with a photo booth, then you wouldn't have to worry about what that looked like, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And so even just on the, so our colleagues in comms shared with us that they were some of the most shared posts on our Instagram, because obviously the graduating students saw the value in using the photo booths. It was also useful for us in terms of updating a tradition. And then hopefully the increase, we had an increase, I believe it was about 60% in terms of, student usage of the photo booths, in terms of sharing their data with us. And then the goal here is to then follow up on that with our, recent grad programming, inviting them to career services that are relevant to them. And then bringing them into the pipeline of alumni engagement. Yeah. So certainly, I think it's always part of that conversation about what are we doing, and how do we make it either more expansive, inclusive, accessible? How do we freshen it up a little bit while still keeping the core of what we're trying to do?
Oftentimes, you said something really interesting, and we could talk about it more, but I wonder if not the younger generation of graduates isn't more interested in shareable moments as opposed to events, coming out of different types of experiences with just what you said, a light touch, a moment that you can share in your social stream, sort of a good feeling for the day, and then keep pressing on, right? But you don't necessarily need some of the event ceremony components that maybe other generations of graduates have come to appreciate. I don't know, Chris, what do you think about that? And then if you could sort of chime in on what you think is important a new leader ought to be thinking about when they take on a role like Temi has.
Yeah. Real quick, Mary Eve has put in the question. So I don't know if you saw it, Temi, but does your team include annual giving? Is that on your remit? Do you have that oversight?
So it is not on my remit. We've got a really fantastic development team here as well, and so annual giving is within that portfolio. Salut, Marie-Ève. So nice to see you. Thanks for joining.
Marie-Ève, thank you for the pronunciation, and thank you for joining. And so 18 people, alumni engagement. That's amazing. So back to Ryan's question. One, as a 57-year-old, I don't think about what younger people want and enjoy because I'm not that a younger person. I count on the two of you to tell me what that is. But I do think it's experiences, it's digital, it's all the things we've been talking about. But I my work when I was in the roles and leading shops was to put people around me who knew the answers to those questions, not for me to try to figure them out, because I had people who did that stuff. And so there's one piece. But advice I give to any new leader, and Temi, I'll give it to you as well, is number one, the tendency in a new role as the leader, especially if you're a first-time leader, is to boil the ocean, trying to do everything. Like the strategic plan has 55 priorities in it. And I'm like, focus on the most important 3 things and do those really well. That's number one. In your tour, you sound like you're doing this already, but it's listen more and talk less. Just get out there and see people. And then the third thing, anybody before they get started, hopefully you did this or are executing on it, is what's your 100 days plan? You need to have a plan for the first 3+ months to really get on the ground and get it going. And those are the most important ones, I think, to get started. The fourth one would be hire a seasoned consultant to help you do the work and get acclimated.
Put an exclamation point on point 4.
Point 4, right?
Yeah.
So what does year 2 look like for you? Temi, as you're thinking about those things, the first 100 days, the accomplishments, and moving forward into this next fiscal year.
Well, so I mentioned earlier that we do have an alumni base with a lot of affinity. So really, for year 2, what I'm hoping to be able to do is look at the baselines of the work we've done in year 1, and see what some of those opportunities for smart growth might be. Sorry, I'm at my mother's condo, and you guys may have heard the Google Assistant reminding me of something that I'm certainly not going to do because I'm on this.
Didn't hear.
Yeah.
We didn't catch your digital assistant. It's okay.
Then that's fantastic. And so I will say, so certainly looking at those baselines for engagement, Chris, to your point, We know that, again, we've got this very interested group of alumni and an interested group of alumni that also have a base of in-person engagement. So what are the ways in which we can build out that right engagement mix so that hopefully, obviously we're not, that we have a good number of opportunities for people to engage in ways that they traditionally have engaged and that they enjoy engaging in, but also being able to build out new opportunities to bring in, the rest of our constituent groups and play a little bit with some of the new paths that we're looking for. I'm also really excited just to work more with our volunteers. I think that there's lots of room for, leveraging volunteers, whether it's with some of our content and our programming, as well as the ways in which volunteers are engaged in the work of the university and the institution for providing strategic guidance. So those are the things I'm really looking forward to.
Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to ask, I hope I don't ruin our script for the bonus section, but play off the volunteer thing a little bit more, and noting that you have Burns Cheadle on the call with us, one of your new board members, so you can't say anything really bad about no. What's the challenge you face with an alumni board or volunteers? Some of the things we face in the U.S., I'm sure are similar in Canada, but is it a governance body? Are they helping you, tell you to do your work, or is it you guiding their advisory? I'm assuming. Talk about that a little bit.
So we've got the Western Alumni Association has an advisory board of directors, and the chair right now is Melanie Peacock. We've got an incoming chair who also very excited to have into the role. So in terms of the conversation about volunteers, to your point, Chris, and I know you're very aware of this, the model around alumni volunteer, the model around alumni volunteer boards is changing. A lot of institutions have been thinking differently around, do we have chapters? Do we have branches? What does that look like? And so, I'm not going to wade into those waters directly here, but certainly some of the pieces that I'm most interested in is using volunteers tactically across our mass engagement programs. And by that, I mean inviting our directors on our various boards, inviting our volunteers that are engaged in different affinity groups, and making sure that we have their presence, we have their expertise, and that we're leveraging them across all of our programs. Because again, I think that that's also an element of bringing in new people into the work of the Alumni Association. The hope too is that by using our volunteers more tactically across our mass engagement programs, that we will also be increasing their affinity for the institution, that they will feel that they are, doing valuable work. And so two little points to that, obviously using them as advocates for some of our digital programs and courses. We're going to be piloting some courses around kind of climate change and diversity, equity, and inclusion. So, having our volunteers join in with us on this, take those classes, share feedback. And my apologies to Sarah if Sarah's on here, because I'm sharing this before probably we're ready to go live on it.
Guys, get out in front of the news. Break some news here on Alumless. Yeah.
Trying not to. But certainly that, and to your point, Chris, I think across a lot of institutions, volunteer engagement is the metric that often most highly correlates with increased engagement in the other categories, right? So that's where my thinking is coming from on that.
I have two lines I use. They're not lines. They sounds too trite, but two sort of words of wisdom, quotes of wisdom when I work with boards. One, I say to the board, and a good board should have their noses in and their fingers out when it comes to strategy and setting the direction. That's your job. That's the staff's job. That's how I believe it. And I'm sure you have, similar feelings on it. And then the other one, I say to the staff, I go back to your role and I say, you get the board you deserve. Because if you work well with them and work hard on it and manage the volunteers in the right way and keep them in the appropriate, I call it the board posture. If they lean too far in, they drive you crazy. Lean too far back, it's not worth their time. And how do you get it? And that's the work that's called volunteer management. And the work that you do as a leader, keeping them in that right place is the art of volunteer management, frankly. So you get the board you deserve. If they're driving you nuts, you deserve it. And if they're, unless you've inherited it, but it sounds like you have a good board. So, but if there's something you look forward to when they come to campus, then that's what you want to get to. You deserve that too. You get both sides of that. So
Well, yeah, and I certainly think that the volunteer piece, a lot of the conversations we had at Case were about relationships, right? And that is the core of the work that we do. So
Yeah.
really just building all of that up and at scale is what I'm excited for.
And if, folks like Burns don't behave themselves, you just cycle them out, right? You just find some new people and get better.
Let's bring Burns on for a little bit of the interview and ask him how his experience has been. No.
All right. Well, we're going to further explore these conversations and more with Temi in our bonus section of the podcast. So your fan club is going to need to subscribe to the Alumless podcast in order to hear your thoughts in the bonus section. I do want to say thanks to Jenny Cook-Smith for joining us from Case, and a big high five on the conference to all of her colleagues at Case. Yeah. Thanks for doing that.
Hopefully recovery has happened or is still happening maybe.
And it sounds like everyone thinks you're the right person for the right job, at least according to the comments going on LinkedIn. So congratulations on all you've done so far and on your role there at Western. We'll pick up the conversation. Chris, who do we have on next week? In 2 weeks.
Yeah, 2 weeks. And you could help me with pronunciation. It's Annie
Quaddy.
Yep. That's what I thought. From UTEP, who has a really interesting job and an interesting role at a really interesting place. So looking forward to having some conversation with Annie from UTEP, University of Texas, El Paso. UTEP.
Yeah, really, really interesting school. Primarily a Hispanic minority serving school, majority, right? Hispanic majority serving institution. And Annie is AVP Alumni and Donor Engagement, doing some great work there. We're excited to have her on in 2 weeks. But for now, we'll say goodbye. Have a good weekend, everybody. Pick us up on the podcast to hear more from Temi, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everybody. So nice to be here.
Yeah.